Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We start with public participation and recognition, acceptance of gifts and donations, and this is an action item. That the Board of Education accept the donation from the Lady J Barbs, a girls' youth basketball feeder program headed by Shelley Nelson, of $500 to Clinton Rosette Middle School and $500 to Nutley Middle School and $1,500 to the DHS girls' basketball program to be used for practice jerseys, duffel bags, and new warm-ups. Do we have a motion?
Roll call, please. Davis.
Yes.
Dekalb.
Yes.
Millet.
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes.
Craig Smith.
Yes.
Howard Zell.
Yes.
And Shelley for tonight, I don't see her. Thank you to Shelley and Nelson and the Vault Youth Program for donating that money to our programs. Thank you. Next, we have public comment. Members of the public who wish to speak to the board should complete a request card prior to the meeting. This section of the meeting will be reserved for comments from the public. All comments should be limited to 3 minutes, and criticism of individuals is not in order. Tonight we have 4 cards, and we'll start with Kate Cordella, and she's going to speak on social workers.
Good evening. Good evening. Imagine that in kindergarten for the first time. This is your first experience in school and you are extremely nervous. Your family dynamic is unstable as your mom is raising her 4 children mostly on her own while your dad sporadically comes into your life but always seems to leave before you're ready to say goodbye. You have 3 siblings, all vying for your mom's attention. She works the second shift, so you see her when you leave the house in the morning and when she gets home and kisses you when you're asleep. Being in a classroom of 28 5-year-olds makes you anxious. You are unable to follow basic directions because it is loud and energetic and visually stimulating. When you are redirected, you become agitated and react by yelling and hitting others. The adult who attempts to de-escalate you may or may not have received CPI training, so despite their best efforts, escalates you further. Today is Monday, and IEP meetings, therefore the school psychologist is unavailable. The building social worker is at another school. A resource teacher has to be pulled from groups to assist you in becoming calm enough to return to class. If she is successful, you spend the rest of the day feeling ashamed and insecure. On Tuesday, you have another incident and need assistance. You think the resource teacher will help you today, but instead it's the social worker who you have never met. You don't know him, you don't trust him, but he's the only adult available to help you. On Wednesday, you come into school in tears because your dad called last night and you miss him terribly. Yesterday, you met with a social worker, but today it is the school psychologist whom you have never met. You actually made some headway yesterday with the social worker and would like to see him again today, but he's in another building. You act so extremely that you are removed from your classroom and sent home for the rest of the day. Can you imagine how this must feel as a 5-year-old? Most likely not, because the challenges that our children face today are so very different from the ones that we experienced growing up. As our district population and the needs of our children change, we must change. It is vital to the social and emotional growth of our kids that we put people and processes in place that help consistently lift them up instead of leaving them stranded. Our children need and deserve full-time building social workers. It's essential that they are afforded opportunities to build relationships with adults in their school who are specifically trained to meet their needs. As a teacher with 28 students, I am just not equipped to provide my students with the individualized support they deserve to have to be successful in daily situations. Thank you.
And next we have Dana Sweet. She wants to speak also with more social workers.
Thank you. When you call the office for help in your classroom and no one is available, what are you to do? When you have 27 other students looking at you wondering what you're going to do about the chair being thrown, what are you to do? When you have to spend a half an hour of your time picking up the room, picking up the supplies, from student supply bags that were just dumped and strewn across the room, and your students have to be with another teacher. How do you explain what has happened? These are all questions that I've asked myself over the past 2 years. Many of these instances have occurred multiple times over a several-month period before it could really be looked at by the team. This shortage of available people to help with a crisis situation and a student in crisis is no secret. There are times in the day in which you find that no one can come help a situation, leaving you, the classroom teacher, to help calm a student, stop a student from leaving the building, or stop a student from harming themselves or others. There are times within the day that a social worker or school psychologist present in the building at all times would help with these crises. In buildings, there are multiple crises a day, leaving the only people to respond special education teachers, assistants, and classroom teachers. There needs to be individuals who are trained to help in these situations present, who are able to be called on a moment's notice in all buildings. Some smaller elementary schools only have a social worker present 2 days a week. Those 2 days are filled with trying to meet students' minutes, attend meeting after meeting, not to mention attempt to begin the information gathering for other student evaluations. There are some buildings who only have a psychologist on meeting days because, well, that psychologist is pulled to 3 buildings, some with bigger needs than others. When will you look past the checkbook and at the students? When will you start to see the social emotional factors affecting test scores, academic data, and overall climate of the schools? There are children that are hurting who just don't have the means to communicate with adults about what they are feeling, who need social emotional support, more support than what can be given to them in one day by a teacher who needs to support the other 27 students in a class. There are students who only know one way to communicate that they are hurting, by acting out. Without proper personnel to teach these students how to channel that energy elsewhere, use a calm down tool, or just talk about how they're feeling, these crises are going to keep elevating, and the number of occurrences are going to continue to rise. When nothing is done, how are we to help these students as they get older? What do you think is going to happen in the older grades, specifically at the high school level? If we don't give them the proper resources given to them by the proper personnel, they will assume that we are giving up on them, and this is tolerated behavior. Think about the negative effects the decisions you're making based on money has on our students. Or better yet, come join our classes for a few days just to see the shortage of social workers and school psychologists has on our student populations. Respectfully submitted by a teacher who cares about the students of D428. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Joe Mitchell, and he's going to speak about residency.
Good evening, everyone. Over the last couple of weeks, I've had the opportunity to dig into the lawsuit that has been filed against the school board. As I've dug, it's become more apparent to me how baseless it really is and how it is based in fear. But as I was digging, I started to think about my wife, who for the last 9 years has dedicated herself, blood, sweat, and tears, to this district as a building administrator. And what this lawsuit really does is it questions her competency and integrity as to doing her job. Not just my wife, but every building administrator is being questioned on their competency and their integrity of doing their job. And that's a concern for me, not only as a parent of the school district, but also as a taxpayer in this community. And I'm proud to say I'm a product of District 428, middle school, elementary school, and high school. And so I know that the school district has made a decision to do whatever it's doing with the random sampling. I have inquired of several school board members who is doing this. And I understand because of pending litigation, they cannot tell me who's doing this. I understand, that's fine. But I was here in August when the CEO from National Investigators was here, did his presentation, and the community spoke very loudly. School board spoke very loudly as to the point of A, we're not ready for this at this time, and B, they wanted more community input before moving forward. But I understand because of the pending litigation, you guys had to move forward and do something. So my question is, what are the checks and balances on whoever is doing this assessment? Who is going to check their data? When it was very clear when the gentleman was here presenting in August, they make money, their revenue comes from long-term contracts. And what is going to prevent whatever organization you're using to present data that's not good data for them to get a long-term contract from this district? So who is the checks and balances on this, whatever company, whoever company it is? And what's going to protect us fiscally from not getting involved in something if we have not checked the data or the numbers that whatever firm gives back to this district. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next, we have David Barrow, and he's going to speak on the residency check.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent, members of the board. I'd first like to applaud your wisdom in bringing in the city's expert from the water district, water department to explain the lead levels found in our district school at the last board meeting. Numbers taken out of context can cause fear and even panic among your constituents. And it was reassuring that you chose to bring in someone who can make sense out of the findings contemporaneously with their release. I would ask that you take no less care with the findings of the ongoing residency check, which I assume is either complete or nearing completion. I think it's absolutely crucial that no numbers from this residency check be released without putting them in the context of the very broad definition of residency as put forth by state and federal regulations. Furthermore, to maintain the credibility of the board, the administration, and district staff responsible for vetting the eligibility of students attending our district schools, I would ask that a representative from the regional administration, as well as a representative from the State Board of Education, be on hand to explain relevant residency requirements and interpret any numbers generated by the check at the same time these numbers are released to the public. Concerned citizens have already presented carefully researched arguments backed up by statistics showing that it's very unlikely that a significant number of students will be found to fall outside of the residency requirements. It goes against common sense to suppose that enough out-of-residence students could be identified to eliminate even one classroom, one teacher, or any subset of the services provided to our students, and thus save the district's taxpayers any money whatsoever. On the other hand, the residency check itself represents a substantial outlay of the district's resources, especially if it is taken beyond this initial survey. My understanding is that the board undertook the residency check in the first place in order to placate the plaintiff in the John Doe lawsuit and avoid further litigation on the subject. However, without an understanding of the broad definition of residency, it's my fear, as well as the fear of others, that any numbers generated by the residency check might be misperceived and thus encourage a further expenditure of resources on a frivolous suit based on hearsay and innuendo, and I've read the suit as well. At the last meeting, I asked for a written response to my comments from the board. I did not get any written response from the board. Is it better if I email this individually to the board members to ensure that I'll get some kind of response to my request, or can I address you on that and ask you? I did speak to some of the administration, and but I did request the board's input on this. It's two separate entities.
This is pending litigation, and we can't.
Well, I guess I understand that, but as to my question of if numbers are released, would the board ensure that at least the same care that was taken with the release of the numbers in the lead issue, that at least that much care would be taken in bringing in experts from the state and the region in order to interpret those numbers?
At this point, the board has not discussed at that length of what we're going to do on that step. And when we do get to that point, we will be sharing it with the public.
But will it be shared just raw numbers, or will there be a context provided? That's my question.
At this point, we don't know.
Okay.
We need to see the data first before we can make those.
This isn't a conversation anyway.
Okay, it's fine. I actually just opened by saying, should I email this to get a response from the board members?
When we can share that, we definitely will.
Okay.
And I will say, I will share with you what I can collectively from the board, but again, we're somewhat limited on what we can share at this point.
Thank you. And next, we have board committee reports and correspondence. No?
Two things, one of which is Friday night I had an opportunity to attend the science fair held in Clinton Rosette School. Tim, great science fair. The kids there were exceptional. And another, on the 25th of January, I was in attendance at a social justice committee meeting. There's a group of people there doing a heck of a lot of work to try to deal with issues of diversity in our community and try to smooth over and resolve and have everybody in this community be welcome and participate. One of the things that has come back in 2 different meetings, at least, possibly more, is that I'll notice as we sit in the room here that the mission statement has changed. That change was the responsibility of the board, and it was done and produced outside of the view of the community. And the members of the Social Justice Committee, as the board member who was sitting in there, said that shouldn't have been outside the view of the community. The community should be setting what the mission is, or at least have input into it. So I'd like to ask the board over time to consider change of the, it's a request from the Social Justice Committee that we go back to the previous mission statement. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I was actually going to say something or ask a question rather about the same thing that Howard spoke on, and that is, I've noticed a couple of times now that in Jamie's report to us on Fridays that the Social Justice Committee has met. I have not been to it. You said it was Wednesday? We went to it Wednesday?
It was the 25th, I don't remember the date.
Okay. So Victoria, back when we discussed this, going back some time, I was supposed to be in Howard involved. I have no notice or recognition that these things are going on. So if I'm supposed to be that, I'd appreciate if somebody would let me know.
That's fine.
Okay. Also, along the same lines as the committee meetings, and this is what I'm speaking about generally, as board member assignments to committees. I was assigned outside of this year to a discipline committee. Now, I have not found or been at any discipline committee meeting since then. I did get an email from Tim Vincent, thank you, Tim, about next May's student handbook discipline meeting. That's something that generally takes place at that time for preparation of the following year. But again, same thing as with the Social Justice Committee. I'm the assigned board member to that, and I want to know when and if or where these things exist. So far, I haven't heard anything about it. And the reason I bring it up tonight is that I have heard of instances of discipline, which I think go above and beyond just the ordinary building principal level of things. I imagine that every day there's discipline that needs to be taken care of. But the board speaks to policy, and I think that's, in my view, at least why board members are put on committees, is to at least sit in and hear what is going on these various committees. And so I want to know what committees exist and when they meet, and I want to be there if it's appropriate and if it's part of that assignment. I've looked through board policy. I found a couple of mentions of discipline, but only one that speaks directly to that, and that happens to be responding to Section 7 with regards to students with special needs, and discipline committee, a standing discipline committee, and board policy. So I'm saying this in preface to some other things we'll talk about tonight, but it's part of board correspondence and reports. So anyway, I'm curious about that. Now let me say something that's kind of fun. I live in Malta, well actually just outside of Malta, and I want to share with everybody, the Malta, I have this, I'm going to give to you, Jamie. The Malta Library, and I know the Dekalb Library has done this or things like this many times. Dekalb Library has hired a certified student tutor. And this person, according to this notice, is there from 4 to 6 Thursday, from 5:15 to 7:15. I'm sorry, that was 4 to 6 Wednesday. Thursday from 5:15 to 7:15, and Friday from 4 to 6. Certified tutor. Her specialties are math and science, but she can help with most everything else, but not foreign languages. So I'm going to give this to you, Jamie. It's a sort of an extracurricular announcement, I guess. But I know that our kids need help. And so, Christine, I see You know, anybody over there in Malta, anybody, this could be from not just Malta. I've talked to the librarian, the director over there. Any kid can come to this. So if you know of someone that needs help and like to speak with a certified tutor, there's one available. I understand it's for the rest of this semester. Call the library over there in Malta, Malta Township Library. You can Google it and get the phone number. So that's my spiel about Malta.
Melissa, could you please resend out the committees and who's assigned to them, and then the date and time that they meet?
And that is online, by the way, folks. If anybody's interested, you know.
Malta thing?
No, I'm sorry. I've jumped back to what you just talked about. No, the committee, the board persons that are assigned to whatever committee, that is under the board section of online of our website. So.
And I just have two quick shout outs to the forensics team for winning the regional title over the weekend. They are on to sectionals, I believe, this Saturday at Huntley, Illinois Middle School, or not middle school, at Huntley, Illinois High School. And also to the girls bowling team for qualified for sectionals. This is the first time they've qualified in 7 years, so congratulations to them too for a great weekend. So. And I hear we have a very busy Saturday at our high school this week. We have STEM or SIT conference. And do you want to touch on that at all? What's going to happen?
The students involved with technology conference, it's our 10th year. So for those of us that have been there from the beginning, pretty exciting. And that will begin at 8:30 on Saturday morning, and students grades 3 through 12 are presenting to each other. There are half-hour sessions that students are going to and from. So if you've not had a chance to experience it, it's pretty awesome. And then anybody wants to take the ACT, that's happening on Saturday morning as well at the high school. And then the Midwest quarterfinals for acapella are taking place, and our acapella group will be competing Saturday.
Can I say one more thing? It's sort of extracurricular, but it dovetails nicely with what Jenny just said and with our forensics team doing so well. Today at middle of the afternoon, SpaceX launched a rocket that successfully reached orbit. It's the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Our kids are going to have jobs in this field, okay? They launched a rocket that is almost as powerful as the Saturn V that put the men on the moon. 5 million pounds of thrust, 27 rocket engines, rocket nozzles, and 2 boosters in the main. And the really cool thing, I watched it happen. It was delayed by 2 hours because of high shear up in the upper atmosphere. That subsided. They launched this thing. Absolutely astounding. I'm a scientist engineer. I mean, and I got excited. Now, I was in high school, like our kids are now, when the Saturn V's launched a number of missions, to lunar orbit. But this rocket, after it was up and gone, 2 of the boosters came back and landed on the pad. Unbelievable. I watched this on the cameras that they have on the rockets, right? Mm-hmm. These things, you'd think they were airplanes. They came back and went like this, and just nice and gentle with 3 outriggers landed right there at the pad where they had left from.
Right. All
Unbelievable.
right, let's move on.
It's cool. Well, you got to have something to be excited about,
I appreciate the passion. All right. Next, we have the fiscal year 2016-2017 audit comprehensive annual financial report. And this is an action item that the Board of Education accept the audit and comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2017. Do we have a motion?
So move.
I'm going to introduce Mr. Randy Mace. He's our auditor from Klein Hall, and he's going to go through our report. There's a copy for the board there. There's also a copy that is on our website. So everybody can get a copy that is also attached to the agenda item. So if you can't find it, let me know. Copy available for 130 pages plus.
Yeah, if you suffer from insomnia, this might be your cure. But thanks. I'll go over. I'll mention a few highlights here, and I'll keep it pretty brief. But as Cindy mentioned, this is a comprehensive annual financial report. What sets that apart from most financial reports is that District 420 goes to the extra effort of preparing an introductory section and a statistical section, and crosses all the T's and dots all the I's, and submits it to 2 financial reporting and work programs. And it has been a winner for the past 6 or 7 years. That is absolutely the best practice in external financial reporting in the school district, and not many districts in Illinois and really across the country do that. Only about 40 of the 800 plus districts in Illinois go through that extra effort. We audit the middle part, that financial section. We produce really 3 reports. We put an opinion on this, we put an opinion on the report that goes to the ISB, and we put an opinion on the single audit, which relates to your compliance with laws and regs and internal controls of your federal programs. In all those reports, we had no qualifications, we had no findings. Your grant programs are being administered as they should be, and in fact, there's controls in place to ensure that they're being administered properly. One thing is, incidentally, this introductory section that you prepared this district is the best one of any of my districts. There is more information related to the district's planning and where you've been and where you're going than any of the intro sections that I come across. But if you read no further than page 4 of the management's discussion and analysis of the report, you'll get a good understanding of what happened financially within the district for the year, and it would save you from reading the 130 some odd pages. Couple of observations on page 16 is your fund balance sheet, and I just want to point out there that District 428 does take the rather conservative approach, not all districts do this, of deferring the first installment of your real estate taxes. So the June collections related to your tax levy isn't recognized as revenue in the current year. It's deferred to the next year. It's earmarked for the next year's operation. Page 19 is the operating statement, and this is on a fund basis. The general fund includes that O&M and working cash and product is in there. But something that we always like to look at is to compare your ending fund balance to a year's worth of annual expenditures. And I'm aware that you do have a policy to earmark that in the 25 to 33% range, 15 to 25, and you're right at that. So you're adhering to your plan there, and fund balance. I'm often asked, what do you think? Where should your fund balances be? And that's always a tough question, but there are some things to consider. You need fund balance for cash flows, first of all, just to get between tax collections. You might need some cash for some capital needs that you don't have the ability to issue bonds for. That's another big thing. Another issue is you never know what kind of curveballs the state's going to throw at you. There's late state payments or the reduced, etc. There's also talk of a tax freeze out there. And, if there's a tax freeze, it wouldn't take very long for even modest increases in salaries to erode your fund balance. So that's a good idea too. The other one that scares me, if you flip to page 39, is the net pension liability related to teachers' retirement system. You can see some rather large numbers there. The district's share of the net pension liability is about $10 million. The state share of that liability, just for District 428, is $284 million. The total net pension liability, and that's the unfunded portion, that's net of assets, is close to $295 million just for District 420. Statewide, that number is roughly, $165 billion. So if that ever comes to the local district's way, any part of that could be devastating to your financial position.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
How is post-tier 3 going to impact that?
I'm sorry, what?
If they go,
Tier 3?
If they get tier 3 pushed through.
Well, that's forward thinking, I think. So, this is an actuarial valuation as of your populations now. I don't think it's going to change what's happened, but it would reduce the increases, I think. I don't know, do you have a better answer for that?
No, tier 3 really is, it's starting from a certain point moving forward, kind of how tier 2 started in 2011, and then those benefits are less than people that are in the tier 1. So really it helps stop the bleeding to some extent, but yeah, what's being calculated here is based on people that are primarily in tier 1 and what that application looks like. So it'll help the future, it's just gonna take a long time to get there.
So the only way that this is reduced is if they do open the opportunity for tier 2 employees to go tier 3, which has been discussed.
We need to change that. Yeah. Change the structure, or push that onto the district. Well, the liability will still be there, it's just that the district will pay for it rather than the state.
Right.
Yeah, and if you're paying more relatively than the state is, that could potentially reduce that pension. Anyway, more on the positive note, on page 34 is a summary of your bond activity for the year, and I'm sure you're aware you've had a couple of refunding transactions here recently. Only one of those is reflected in here as of June 30, but you did gain some pretty significant cash flow savings as a result of those refundings, and present value real economic gains as well. And it was good that you got most of, or just about all of that done before the tax law changed. And those refunding bonds became taxable obligations that would have jacked your rates up some. Page 62 and beyond then are the combining and individual account financial statements. And there is shown on a line-by-line basis the actual results for the year compared to budget, as well as prior year comparative purposes. The message I get from those statements is that the district has laid out a financial plan as reflected in its budget, and you adhere to that financial plan and stuck to your budget, and those variances were all relatively small. That's just about it for me. I did have one other observation. In your statistical tables on page 103, this is the makeup of your EAV. It's categorized into the type, industrial, residential, commercial, etc. And you do have a nice mix of EAV. Your residential component is only about 57% of your total EAV. So the burden isn't so much on the homeowners as in many districts. We often see that when that percentage gets to be 75% or more, then things start to get a little more difficult financially. So that's a really interesting thing. Operationally, we found the district's business office to operate in a very professional manner, an excellent organizational attitude towards internal controls, and our auditors get in and out of here in real good order, and Cindy and her staff do a wonderful job. So it's a pleasure working on your audit, and job well done. Any questions for me?
Yeah, I got a question.
Sure.
Of course, I always have a question.
Absolutely.
So I just happened to be looking at the Kane County's assessor's website yesterday and was noticing the proportion of farmland versus other. And I wonder if you've had any experience you can speak to the change as the population base moves west from the city of Chicago. And we're starting to see things like that in Dekalb, have been for a little while now. But last time I checked, I think Dekalb is still about 90% farmland. The land use was about, I'm not saying the EAV.
Sure.
But the land use area was somewhere around there. And so when you say nice mix of EAV, well, that's great, but I'm wondering, if you look globally, not globally, but in that sense of global, at the collar counties and so on, what do you see with respect to this mix of EAV?
Yeah, well, if that land is being developed into residential communities, then that's adding kids into the mix. And if you don't have the commensurate industrial commercial to balance that out, then there's more of an onus to the homeowners as far as the tax bills go.
Yeah.
So that's what we see, and that's where we see that creep. That's where more of an outlying area might have been in this 57-60% range. Now it's in the 75-80% range, and that's where it gets a little trickier to balance. So
It's a concern for the future.
sure.
Okay, thank you.
Incidentally, my son's he's applying for he's a STEM student at ULA.
Wow,
So
great school.
yeah.
Yes, Mike.
Any other questions?
No.
Thank you, and Cindy,
Thank you so much.
for a
Thank
great
you.
job.
You're
and-
Good news.
so thank you.
Absolutely.
Good
Yeah, they
news.
do a great job.
And I'll point out, this is Cindy's first year with the CAFR that she is directly responsible for. Not that you haven't been behind Andrew all those years.
She's just getting the credit, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But good job.
Yeah, great news.
All right.
Roll call then.
Jeff Alburn,
Yes.
Karen Balette,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Next, we have social and emotional learning, D428, and this is an information presentation.
Good evening. The purpose of our presentation tonight is to really discuss the social emotional learning in District 428. Primarily, we're going to start with an overview of the foundations of social emotional learning. What is it? Why is it important? Why are we talking about them? And then talk a little bit about the social emotional needs in our district. What is the experience like for our students and staff? What kind of needs do we have in our buildings? And then kind of follow up with our social emotional response. Now, knowing what we know about social emotional learning and about the needs in our district, how can we respond? This is really a joint presentation by the Curriculum and Instruction and Student Services departments, both at the district level and at the building levels. So you'll see a number of people kind of coming up here to represent that. And to start us off, I'm going to introduce Dr. Lisa Becker to talk about the foundations of social emotional learning.
Okay, thanks, Amy. This will be pretty brief. I know that this isn't like a college course, social emotional learning, so feel free to interrupt with any questions. But briefly, what is social emotional learning? It's really the teacher's ability or the personnel's ability to teach social emotional learning skills in a similar fashion that we would teach reading writing. So that it would include direct instruction on some of the things that you see up here. So, for example, the showing empathy for others. It would be able to instruct students and have them understand perspective taking. For example, they're walking down the hallway at DHS, they get bumped, to understand that that bump isn't necessarily an aggressive act, that being able to shift the perspective and think, okay, maybe that person is in a hurry or they were shoved, and being able to stop, inhibit that impulsive and aggressive impulse, and come to a better solution. So it's being able to teach all of those on a more direct basis that links to more positive pro-social skills in the classroom. So we know it's important because having those skills increases student academic achievement. It does increase their pro-social skills, but it also increases their student achievement. This is based off of, I pulled a meta-analysis study of looking at over 200 studies, almost 300,000 students. And what they're finding is compared to control, so kids that go through school kind of in the typical way without direct social emotional learning, kiddos that have that social emotional learning profile, that they're systematic school-wide, have that 11th percentile point gain in academic. And that second bullet there I thought was particularly interesting is that when they're looking at that data on a broader level, they're finding those effects are really powerful when the school staff do the social emotional work. So as opposed to, let's say, an outside agency and doing a teenage pregnancy prevention program, let's say for 6 weeks, that might have a short-term impact, but we're not seeing the long-term impacts. If they're developed in schools and provided by school staff and kind of have a more holistic approach, that's when they see these academic. So similarly, when we look at social emotional learning, we know that it has long-term impact. So if we have kindergartners that have strong social emotional competency, they tend to graduate from high school on track. You know, they don't have a couple extra years to try to make up credits. They complete that college degree, and then they obtain that stable employment. And that also links to when we talk to in a couple slides, I'll talk about the rate of return in terms of dollars spent in social emotional investment and dollars gained back, is because those students are able to join employment early and so produce more economic benefit earlier in life. They're also less likely to be involved in different taxpayer-funded entities, including juvenile justice or criminal justice entities, public assistance. And there's lots of different surveys by employers. This one I pulled from the World Economic Forum, talks about social emotional skills or soft skills as being really important when we're looking for students graduating out of high school and college. So in addition to just this skill base, the ability to calculate the trajectory of the SpaceX rocket, you've got to be able to work in that team, understanding that that person might have differences, work with people that you may not particularly like, and be able to work as a team to come together. Those are those soft skills or social emotional skills that employers are looking for. It's also important because we do have social emotional learning standards that are put forth by the state of Illinois. This is similar to our Common Core standards. So we have Common Core standards for academics. We have social emotional learning standards to look at social emotional learning. The difference here is that our Common Core standards, we've done a really nice job of aligning our academics, pre-K to high school, kind of vertically and horizontally. We spent a lot of time making sure that that aligns and we're meeting those standards. We haven't been able to do that as systematically for our social emotional learning standards. So while we have ways to meet these in kindergarten, in 5th grade, and middle school and high school, it's not systematic, and it differs by building, and it's not as systematic as we're saying now. Finally, there's there's more slides, sorry. Another reason is it saves us money in the long term. So this is pulled from the CASEL website, so that's the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. If you're curious to learn more about that, that's a collaboration out of University of Illinois at Chicago, Loyola, and some public schools in that area. And what they're finding is that for every dollar invested, so that would include, they use like the cost of, let's say if they're using a program, a systematic program, plus the time that a teacher might have, that part of their salary, that part of the facilities cost. For every dollar that they have to use for that, it's ending up to be an $11 return. And I wish the gentleman was still here, I'm not a financial expert, but from what I can understand, what they're doing is they're trying to put a cost on what society would pay for, let's say, what are we paying for an aggressive act out in society? What does that cost for the jail or police involvement, things like that. So that's how they're calculating 1 to 11 ratio.
Yeah, could I stop you for a second, Dr. Bear? I was very curious when I was reading this on our faculty material about this 11 to 1.
Yeah.
So I think you just said that that's a societal cost,
right,
with this ratio. And how do you gather that data? That would seem very slippery to me.
So I can't speak to it specifically. What I can do is, if we want to look at it. But what I was able to understand is they take a look at, they call it a shadow plot, and they try to look at, like for the example of aggression, what does society say we're going to pay for an aggressive act? And so they calculate what that means in terms of the difference, jail time, if you're coming back out, the recidivism rate, things like that. They're calculating that number as one piece of it. But Castle does a better job of explaining it in layman terms. I only
Could you
know
give
that.
us the link or whatever?
Yeah, it's in that, yeah.
Interesting.
It'll be the next two slides. I'll show you
Okay,
which one.
okay, thanks.
Absolutely. And Castle has a ton of it too, not just that article, but that article is kind of a summary one. Finally, we know it's important because teachers need it in the classroom. So that 93% up there speaks to just national data that was pulled by Castle in terms of just a national survey, teachers who want to focus on social emotional learning in the classroom. But we have also some of our own local data. So when we did the district diversity study, there was actually a couple of questions that got to social emotional learning. And one was looking at if teachers felt like they had the skills to address social emotional learning. And what we see is teachers are reporting that they have pretty decent self-efficacy, or they feel pretty confident in their ability to teach kids in a systematic way about social emotional skills. But what they're saying is they don't have the resources, the time to do it. The other thing that diversity study pulled was there was some qualitative data where teachers could write in, what are some of your main concerns? Kind of open-ended. What are some of your main concerns? The district. And overwhelmingly, when they reviewed the qualitative data, it was coming back up with teachers reporting their inability as the resources stand right now to meet the social emotional needs of their students, and how that was disrupting their ability to deliver the academic. So in summary, if we're doing social emotional learning in a systematic way with the right supports, we expect that increases student academic achievement. Students are coming to school, they're in a place where they're ready to learn. That we're able to prepare students to reach their full potential of lifelong learners. So looking at our mission statement that we're addressing that we're saving money in the long term and really responding to the needs by staff. And then I think, one more thing. Okay, it's at the very end. So at the very end, you'll see links to the couple different meta-analysis, but also the financial. Yeah. You want to see it?
So what do the needs look like then in our district is our next section. But to really illustrate this, we had experts from the building create kind of a student profile that really represents the events that they have experienced in their buildings with their students. So to start us off, Katie and Lisa are going to introduce us to Jane as a pre-K student.
Good evening. All right. So Jane is a student in our preschool program, our at-risk preschool program. She qualifies for the program based on the needs of her family's income that is below the poverty line, some attention concerns for the parent report, and a mother with chronic illness. So when Jane is in the program, we see that she has great pre-academic skills. She can count, knows her shapes, numbers, letters, does a great job with all that. Where we're seeing concerns, though, is during large and small group times when it's a directed activity. She has a hard time sitting, engaging in the activity, focusing for more than a minute at a time. She needs to get up, walk around, explore the room a little bit more. We also see during free choice time, her cooperative play time, that Jane typically plays by herself. She hasn't made many friends. She isn't very social. She likes to do things on her own. If a student tries to join her, she might yell at the student, hit, run away. She doesn't really have those play skills yet. To learn, to share with each other, take turns, those kind of skills she doesn't know yet. So the team is set, which includes the principal, the teacher, the assistant, social worker, psychologist. They've put together an individual problem-solving plan that includes positive rewards for good behavior, consequences for inappropriate behavior, It also includes supported transitions, visuals to help her with the communication, and daily communication with her mother.
So now it's time for Jane to transition to kindergarten. She's been in a very supported environment. She's been with 19 other students to 2 adults, so the ratio of students to teachers is small. She's going to kindergarten with the supports in place. We're going to have that transition meeting with that kindergarten team, just to give a profile of Jane so we can continue that trajectory for her and not just plunk her into kindergarten. Unfortunately, she's going into a setting that's going to be 28-to-1 students, 28 teacher 1, and she'll have less support, longer days, longer weeks. And so here is Jane. Jane's going to come in. No, that's right. So Jane will be going to kindergarten.
So the data that we have for our students who are entering kindergarten show us that currently about 20% of our entering students, of all the students who enter kindergarten in our district, do not yet demonstrate the self-regulation skills that we expect of students who are entering kindergarten. And so these are data coming from the KIDS survey. So the KIDS is the Kindergarten Individual Development Survey. It's a new state assessment that asks all of our kindergarten teachers to observe all of their students in the first 40 days and to rate them along a developmental continuum of where their behaviors are. And in this case, what we find is in approximately about 5 students in each of our kindergarten classrooms are showing that they don't yet have the skills to sit in a circle, right, to follow directions, to pay attention to the teacher, to really access and benefit the kindergarten curriculum that is being presented to them. So that's where a number of our students are starting, according to the KIDS data. So now let's see Jane go into elementary school. So Jane enters kindergarten. Her fall assessment data collected by both the classroom teacher and some other assessments shows that she's at grade level abilities. She is learning as all the other students are. After 2 weeks, Jane begins screaming, hiding under tables, throwing furniture, running from the building, or leaving the room when transitioning, say from recess, to an undesirable task like math. Based on this, we've brought the team together.
So the team meets, we certainly bring the parent in, we have the principal, the classroom teacher, social work psychologist, just like they did at the LDC. And we want to put together a plan that helps Jane succeed in kindergarten. So typically in that case, what we do is we often have some sort of incentive sheet, positive behavior points, or something along those lines that we want to give Jane some feedback on her behavior. Now, typically what happens in kindergarten is that, especially, they usually have trouble with the transitions. So what we do is the teacher collects data after every transition time. And in kindergarten, that's about every 15 minutes. So the teacher has to record about every 15 minutes what's going on with this child so that we can have that data and target certain behaviors. The team also decided during the planning meeting that because of some of the physical aggression, some of the screaming, she obviously doesn't have some coping skills and needs to learn some other social emotional skills. So we decided that it would be a good plan to have her meet with the social worker 2 days a week. So we get into that and we're into the semester and we realize that Jane's only met with the social worker twice. And that's often because the social worker is in meetings like we're having with Jane. They're in special education meetings. They might get called to another building because there's a crisis that's there and an evaluation has to be done right away. There's various reasons why the social worker might not be able to meet with Jane in that particular week. And then, of course, we have our own crises going on at any given time in the building. Part of the plan might also include what happens when she leaves the classroom. And based on the plan, that usually relies on the principal in the building being called when that happens.
The principal, however, at the time might be in observations dealing for evaluations with teachers, might be in those problem-solving meetings, the special education meetings, various reasons the principal might not be able to attend to right at that time. In that plan, we also had the social worker as sort of like the backup person when the principal couldn't get there. The social worker is there only 2 days a week, so we don't always have that as a resource to follow up on. So then Jane grows up and she goes through her elementary career, and we notice that she's got, kind of have a mixed bag of successes. We do notice that as she grows up, she struggles with organization, struggles with on-task behavior, and as time goes on, really has a hard time developing relationships with adults and peers, and just making and holding on to those friendships that are just so important to these kids once they reach, from early on, but especially when they're in 5th grade, having been a 5th grade teacher for a long time. Those friendships are just crucial to those kids. Some days are better than others. Then she reaches the end of 5th grade, and what we do to sort of transition into middle school is the 5th grade teacher fills out a profile sheet and lets the middle school know the types of interventions that we have tried for that kid. So we let them know about the positive behavior points that we've done. We let them know that we, when we could meet with the social worker, and some other type of interventions, whether it's checking with the principal or some other mentor in it. And that's when they get ready to go to middle school.
So in elementary school, some of the information that we have is that about 21% of our elementary students, K-5, demonstrate at-risk levels of behavior, at-risk levels of hyperactivity. This is from the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire, which is a screener that our teachers complete on all of their students, K-5. And it really helps us identify then who are those students whose behaviors are atypical, right? So these are higher levels of these kinds of behaviors than we would expect of kids this age. So in this case, we see about 5 students per classroom that are showing more overactive behavior, more fidgeting, more distraction, more difficulty paying attention, more difficulty following directions than we would expect for students that age. This number we've seen increase across the past 3 years, which is the time that we've been giving the SDQ. And so that we have about 7 or 8 more of these students in each building these past 3 years that are displaying this at-risk level of hyperactivity behavior. We see kind of a similar trend as well for conduct problems. These would be the kind of behaviors that we might have seen with Jane, right, where we're seeing kind of more the physical aggressions behaviors. So currently we have about 14.1% of our elementary students displaying high levels or at-risk levels of conduct problems, disobedience, fighting with other children, physical aggression, throwing things across the classroom like Jane. So Jane is one example, but what we're seeing is we have about 3 of these students in every classroom on average in our elementary building that then require that level of support that you just heard about. This number has been increasing in our district as well, according to the SDQ. And so over the past 3 years, buildings have seen about an increase of 11 students per building that are displaying the at-risk level of behavior.
Could you break it out, students with IEPs versus the main population? Is 40% all-inclusive?
It is all-inclusive.
Okay.
It is all-inclusive. So that would be possible, but I don't have those data.
I just recall when Christy and Connie came to us a couple times back about Jeremy and Phil, and I asked questions. I think it was Connie, if I remember, I brought the data. This was for founders, as I remember. It was 55 kids overall, 11 of which had an IEP or in some way had special needs. So I'm wondering if the ratio is the same applied to this whole 14.1%.
So I'd be happy to break down the data for you, but I also would defer to people's experiences in the buildings. And anecdotally, I don't know if you have in your building a sense of.
Are you looking at me?
Yeah, sorry to talk about your building. Sorry, just not to put you on the spot, but give a sense of that ratio at all.
Well, especially in kindergarten, a lot of times that hasn't happened. And, obviously it's, a lot of times it's not because of academic issues. So I can't say it's IEP kids. A lot of times it's just the general ed population.
The other piece, so because of we can talk about the conduct problems and these types of behaviors where kids are throwing things, engaging behavior that might be a danger to themselves or others. What we see is that gets to a point where we do require kind of intensive individual intervention, or what we might call crisis intervention. And so we have some data there as well that we've been tracking. For elementary level, we just have 2 months of data here, so keep that in mind. And we see across those 2 months, we had 56 incidences that required kind of intensive individualized support. What that might look like would be kind of a risk assessment, a risk of harm assessment. It could include working with a student to de-escalate a student when they are at a point where they are at a risk to themselves or others. It could include a DCFS call when students have disclosed that someone is harming them, or you have some evidence in that case. So there are a lot of different types of activities, but that requires some intensive responses in order to keep our students safe and healthy. This then relates to, what is the elopement? So the elopement is when a student might leave a building, run away from the classroom. We see that a lot in our younger grades. And so that requires then staff to, in order to keep the student safe, to follow the student. I don't know, Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, it's not me, Mary. So that's typically what it looks like is a teacher may give a directive for young children. It activates typically like their fight or flight response for whatever reason, usually different factors that they've had to go through in their life. And so they tend to kind of bolt out of the classroom. And so it's coordinating a response. We put together plans on how we were going to keep that child safe. If it's following versus chasing, the different language we're using with that.
Where does this term come from, elopement? Come on, run away or something.
School psychology.
Yeah. Man, I took 302 at NIU like 30 years ago or whatever, and I don't recall the elopement being used as a term.
Pretty fancy word for it.
My gosh.
When we think about the time required then of our mental health support staff for these kind of crises, it works out to be about, in these 2 months, about 58 hours. Although you double that because typically more than one person is involved, hopefully, to manage a crisis response. So that's kind of the time committed to these specific individual incidences. Thank you. And so now Jane is going to middle school. So Jen will talk to us about Jane in middle school. Thank you.
So as was mentioned, we have a profile sheet that tells us about a student when they come to middle school. So to help us with that transition from elementary building with primarily one teacher and moving into a building with 5 or 6 teachers a day, we have the profile sheet that gives us some information. So that might give us some red flags on Jane that says that maybe she's a student that's struggling with engagement or needing some additional intervention. So we're going to right away start to get to know that student and make sure that we're very aware of her information. Once Jane is in our building and going through the experience of web and all the things we do to support our student with transition, Jane would still continue to have some struggles with engaging in school. So we'd start to see things like missing assignments, we'd start to see things like not engaging in class, and maybe that student's going to start to seem like a little different than some of their peers in terms of their needs. So we're going to be having people, teams are going to be talking about that student, inviting parents in, be having meetings to talk about best ways to support that student, inviting student services people to come and participate, consult, be involved. Jane might be invited to something like morning check-in to help transition into the day. Jane might also be invited to participate in some kind of a group with a school counselor or some other kind of intervention going on during the day. So the student would get a number of supports throughout the 6th grade year. And that student is just a student that's performing currently academically appropriately, but still is needing all those additional supports to be part of the school community in an effective, supportive kind of way. As Jane moves through 6th, 7th and 8th grade, we're going to see a continued need for those interventions, those parent contacts, the time and team meeting to discuss the student. We're going to be looking at things like individual problem solving, where we're coming up with individual plans to support the student in participating in school, like getting homework completed, turning things in, participating appropriately in all parts of school. And then in addition to that, we're going to consider interventions like STEP, which is Student Power Program, which is something that we offer students that are maybe struggling to engage. They're needing those additional supports, need those additional adult connections in order to be part of our school community and to be successful. And so throughout the school time in middle school, there's going to be increasing levels of parent contact, teacher time, student services time, administrative time, to try to manage and support to help the student be engaged in school. And as we get all the way to 8th grade, hopefully we're continuing to see the student do okay academically, but Jane is probably going to, by the end of 8th grade, no longer be testing at an average level and be starting to be below average in academic testing. At that point, we're going to be looking at high school transition and considering how to meet the students' needs in high school, including looking at programs like SOAR at the high school, then the transition program for students who are going to be struggling in middle school to help them get started in high school.
What we see in, I'm sorry, can you go back now? What we see in middle school then is similar crisis intervention data. Excuse me. This is across the first semester here. And what we have here is there were 78 incidences that required, again, intensive individualized response. That would include dealing with a risk of harm assessment, potential hospitalization, other kinds of needs there. And so that maps on to about 97.5 hours of staff time times 2, and sometimes even a third person involved for managing that crisis so that a student can be safe. So now Jane is going to high school.
Okay. So just as Jane has transitioned through all of her experiences, teams are sharing information from one level to the next. So as she transitions from middle school into the high school, the teams are meeting counselors, social workers, administrators to talk about kind of some of the concerns that Jane has experienced throughout her education, as well as making sure that the supports that were in place in middle school are transitioning into the high school level. Counselors are looking at MAP test scores as well as other scores, recognizing that she's now fallen into the below average range compared to her peers. And she's going to require some additional class supports. So things like Algebra AB, looking at Freshman English Humanities 1. Both of those are classes that are offered for lower level general education courses for students that are showing that their skills are starting to fall below average and they're needing that additional support. She's also placed in our Freshman Foundations of Literacy class, which is a reading intervention. As she's getting into the crux of the school year, she's starting to get really frustrated and really annoyed with her classes because she understands the material is kind of easy for her, but she was placed there based on the MAP scores that showed that she was falling below average. Unfortunately, because of her history of not turning in her homework, not studying for tests, not participating in class, she's now failing her high school level courses, which is causing her to not earn credit to graduate from high school on time. As a result, essentially, of what's going on at school, there's now consequences at home. And her mother has decided that because of her failing grades, she's kicking her out of her home. So Jane is now going back and forth between staying at a friend's, going back home for a few months, and then getting kicked out again because her grades are failing, which in essence causes her to miss a lot of school. So now she's not there learning the material every day like she needs to be. Because of all of the things that are going on and have been going on for Jane since she started in preschool, she starts self-injuring, which is a symptom of anxiety and depression. She's trying to find ways to cope with everything that's going on, and she results to doing something that's very harmful for herself One of her friends ends up finding out that she's self-injuring and is very concerned about her, so she refers her to the counselor's office.
So the counselor at the high school level then takes that information and decides to move forward and meet with the student to understand a little bit more of that background information. Upon meeting with that student, they decide to bring forward this case to the problem-solving team where they're going to talk about different interventions and ideas to try to help this student be successful in the high school program. They talk about different interventions such as tutoring, such as meeting weekly with the counselor for those check-ins, for that social emotional support, and they decide to move forward with providing those interventions and monitoring the progress of the student throughout that time. The team re-meets throughout the time period and sees that unfortunately those interventions have still not been successful. So they discuss some placement options of having the student go to ombudsman or our regional safe school AEC to try a different placement, see if a different environment at that point in time would be helpful. Unfortunately, we find out that there's a waiting list for students to attend school at either of those placements, and Jane wasn't able to get a spot. She's then expected to return to her regular classes at BHS and continue to be provided the interventions, although we're still seeing that they're not successful. Finally, a spot is opened up for Jane, and she attends one of those schools. Unfortunately, her attendance only slightly improves there. She earns some credit, but ultimately it's not enough for her to graduate, and she's not able to stay on track with her peers.
I have a question. This sounds like something went drastically off the rails here with Jane. I was following Jane up to this beginning here, and then all of a sudden, self-harm, kicking out of the high school, all that other stuff. It seems to me, I mean, you've been following all along, you've been saying, okay, here we're gonna have counseling here, we're gonna get involved here, we're gonna do this. Then all of a sudden, what happened to all that support structure that you had that was helping our friend Jane? What happened to all those people just as she enters high school? It sounded like some explosive behavior started to happen. And then my question for you is, if that structure is still in place and it went so incredibly drastically off the rails, what are we going to do about repairing this entire situation? Her mom's kicked her out. She's self-abusing. Who knows where she's sleeping in some car? I mean, what structure do we have in place, or could you possibly put in place to repair that?
I think that's a great question, and I think when you think back to where she was at in elementary school, and she was scheduled to have weekly social work sessions, and she wasn't getting that. So then she moves into middle school, and a lot of the things that are put in place because of the crises that the social workers and psychologists and administrators are dealing with, she's not regularly getting that consistent support the way that she needs it. So she's now finding her own way to cope, which isn't a healthy way to cope during the self-injury, because her academic skills now look behind because she's not accessing her education the way that she needs to be. And so now I'm in classes that I'm bored in because I already understand all this information. So the hope would be that in looking at a student like Jane who needed that support right away, that if we're able to provide the consistency for them starting at an early age and at an early level, that we're not going to be seeing Jane in high school the way that we are right now.
Well, I tell you, I teach and have for 17 years in a community college, and I see Jane, a lot of Janes over the years. And I mean, some are redeemable and some are not redeemable. You could throw 40 people at them. So, I mean, I understand, I follow your procedure here. I'm going to be very interested at the end of this discussion for you to tell me, to put a number on how many of those people you need to support our friend Jane. It sounds like about 12.
But if I may interject, part of it is what we just kind of referred to. It's the earlier intervention. Because there's a lot of Janes, I promise, that you don't see. Right. And your professional peers.
I'm here to tell you. I'm very proud of the people that make it to my college or make it to.
They went off the rails long before.
Absolutely, and I understand it. And a lot of them are gone by the time they're juniors in high school.
But a lot of them come back by the time they get to junior college.
I see them.
They're off the rails in 7th, 8th grade. They barely get through high school if they do, and they get their heads straight because they have to go bang their heads out in the world. And they say, hey, I gotta straighten up and fly right. They get back into local junior college and they get back on the rails.
I see them all the time.
Sometimes.
Can we continue?
Okay, sorry about that. I was just questioning.
No, it's a great question. So we have some data here to kind of show some of the magnitude of the concerns we see at the high school level. The lighter blue line is actually first semester last year, and the darker blue is first semester this year. And these again are the highest level of incidences that require individualized response. To show that Jane is not an anomaly. This is a profile of students that we do see at the high school. There were 91 instances the first semester this year, and there were 80 last year, so we've seen it grow as well.
Is that per kid, or could a student in there have multiple?
A student could have multiple needs for support. So for example, I think, Jen, do you want?
Sure.
Sorry.
If you look at like our risk of harm assessments, that's a student that might have some suicidal thoughts or maybe some self-injury. Oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes that's what leads to then a student that's being hospitalized. And so then we're working on gathering classroom work from the teachers, communicating with the hospital, communicating with parents to make sure that they're getting the support that they need.
Okay,
So,
like if you have, if I can read this right, 14 up there in that one. Now, is that 14 students, or is that could be like 10 students and then don't have multiple?
it is incidents of calls to DCFS. So it could be we've called a couple times on one particular student. So yeah.
But that would be embedded in both sets of data though, from last year and this year.
True. And then when we look at the kind of the time reflected here, we're seeing approximately 113 hours of time this year for first semester, again, multiplied by the number of different people involved in resolving an incident. Okay.
So we've talked quite a bit about social and emotional needs within the classroom. Well, these are the social and emotional needs that are making it into technology. So we have a CUSD, which is a cloud access security broker, and ours is called CloudLock. And what it does is it goes through the digital content that the students create in Google Apps for Education. And it basically looks for keywords, regular expressions, and flags content based on matches. So those 35 digital objects are very specifically students who have written something that is very alarming, that isn't already shared with a staff member, in which a member of my staff or myself have looked at the object, I've looked at the object again, and then felt that it needed necessary involvement of building leadership. So those 35 objects that came out of CloudLock was just at the secondary level in one semester. And those would be very much related to like self-harm or harm to somebody else. It's not like cyberbullying or a poem that's gone awry or something like that, but very much this student needs attention from somebody immediately. Securely Auditor is part of CASB, but it's very specific to email. And it's tied into the content filtering that goes along with Chromebooks as well. And those 21 incidents, again, were emails back and forth with students that had an alarming nature to them that we needed to get building administration involved with.
Right, so throughout the district, we have a program called Target, and it is our most intensive program to help students with emotional disabilities. It offers the most intensive services in terms of social emotional support. It is taught by special education teachers. It's supported by program assistants. There's smaller classroom settings, and again, the environment that we try to build in this program is to enhance the trust and provide that flexibility that these students need in order to get the coping skills and those real life skills that we've mentioned, those social emotional learning standards for our students who are most at risk for these concerns. The program is housed in a couple of different of our schools, Brooks Elementary, Clinton Rosette, and Dekalb High School. And this chart up here is actually just within the Target program at the Dekalb High School. As you can see, over the past 3 years, our numbers have increased over 61%. That's just due to the general idea of our presentation tonight that the social emotional needs in this district are growing, and they're growing pretty immensely.
to that end too, so over time, all that we've been talking about tonight, our students that we are unable to serve within our district because of their needs are so intense that they're not able to remain in our general school population. Students that do qualify with a disability, under an eligibility for a disability, under the umbrella of special ed. And we've determined after problem solving and going through many of these processes many times, we determined that they need our most intensive setting, which is a therapeutic day. And that's what we would call outplacing out of our district to a therapeutic day program. And we have currently 90 students outplaced. Those are the numbers of students that we've had outplaced in the last few years, and you can see that our numbers are growing. Our numbers are growing for a few different reasons, but certainly when your numbers are growing in the social emotional area and we're not able to intervene, and the behaviors, the needs that they have are so therapeutic in nature. Because of that, over time, we find that we're needing to outplace more and more students. So again, our capacity to serve our students with our social emotional needs, really, we need additional supports, additional systems in place in order for us to meet the intensive needs of our students throughout our district.
Just a good segue. I think, this is just one part of the picture, is the needs that we're showing here with Jane and with the data that we have. The other part of the picture is what is our capacity as a system to meet those needs right now. And generally what we are finding is that the social emotional needs that we have that are high and that are growing are outpacing the current mental health resources that we have in our district. And part of that is what ends up happening is that these resources are spent primarily dealing with the most intense situations, right? You saw the crisis intervention data. So they are spending the majority of their time dealing with the students that need individual intensive support. And then we are having fewer resources left to help address the other social emotional needs of students that aren't quite there yet, the highest need, but could get there without if we don't properly address their needs when they're at that kind of borderline level. But one way to kind of look at this is through our multi-tiered systems of support, which is how we often think about our systems. How are we addressing supports? I just wanted to show you this framework to remind you. Generally, when we're thinking about this, either for academics or social emotional, we want to make sure we have supports at all three levels. The first level, tier 1, is our general supports for all kids. Right? That's our core curriculum. So on the academic side, that's the reading curriculum that all kids get in their classroom. Tier 2 is that some kids might need some additional support. And so that's where we see maybe some reading interventions on the academic side. And then tier 3 are the more intensive supports that are needed for kids who are significantly struggling. And what we're seeing right now on the social emotional system side is that the majority of our resources are operating at the tier 3 level. But they're spending 80 to 90% of their time at tier 3, which leaves some holes for tier 2 and tier 1. Right? We talked about we have some tier 2 things in place, but not enough to meet the needs that we have. So we have, for example, the STEP program at middle school, right? But we can only have about 10 students in each grade level, in each building, that can access that at a time. So the supports then are not there to prevent our students from going from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3 in their needs, like we saw with Jane.
And to your point, Jeff, our goal is if we have a student who's slid from tier 1 to tier 2, that they don't stay there. That if we can get the supports in place, that we help that student who can't self-regulate, or we help that student who is potentially has some explosive behaviors, that we work with them and they develop those skills, or they become a tier 1 student. And, so then as they move through middle school and into high school, that we don't see them escalating, to that tier 3. And obviously the goal is if we have tier 3 kids to, try to get those kids all the way down to tier 1 through, a system of supports. It's easier to intervene with a 3rd grader than it is with a 7th grader. It's easier to intervene with a 7th grader than it is a junior in high school. But if we can get the work done early with, the kinders through 5th grade, that's where we're going to have the greatest impact. Now, we're not washing our hands with the middle school and high school kids, but that's where, we're going to have the most success of moving kids down back into tier 1. And, with our hypothetical Jane story, along the way, we missed some steps. And that's kind of the point of the story, that we missed some steps because we didn't have all the necessary supports in place for her along the way. And we kind of allowed her to escalate to that point. Sorry to interrupt.
What we wanted to also share with you then is what would that look like? So we have a request, which Sarah will talk a little bit about too next. But basically, so what could it look like if we increased our capacity? What could we provide to our students that might help Jane and all the Janes that we know from getting to a point where she's unlikely to graduate? At the tier 1, part of this, what we could provide with additional support is social emotional learning curriculum for all of our students, right? So that they can become those great candidates for jobs because they have those soft skills that are needed. We could provide the coaching, the classroom management coaching that our teachers are asking for. They're saying, we know that we can do this, but we need some additional resources to support the social emotional needs in our classroom so that we can actually get through our academic curriculum, so that our students can access the academic curriculum. For tier 2, we would be able to provide more small group interventions. We'd be able to have consistency with those small group interventions so that Jane gets more than twice with the social worker in elementary school, that she can have daily, needs depending on her needs, and that we'd be able to help teachers know how to support Jane in the classroom so she can stay engaged with the academic curriculum. And of course, continuing to support tier 3 so that we're able to implement those individual behavior plans and plan those individual behavior plans for all of those students, and then provide them with fidelity so that then we are intervening here, changing the trajectory for Jane and the other students like her. So we'll stay there. There's a lot of information. Anybody else from presenting want to add anything?
I have a question.
Yes.
Are we modeling ourselves after anyone? Do we know of school districts that percentage of these kinds of assistance?
Yeah.
I mean, do we have some idea as to the efficacy of various interventions in other districts? Are we looking at other districts and the models they provide?
Yeah. Great question. This is a part, so having these resources is one piece of the plan. And then what these resources do. But another piece of this plan is that determining kind of what social emotional curriculum is implemented, what kinds of interventions we use at the different levels, goes through another process where we look to see what is a evidence-based, research-based curricula that other districts are using that we know we're going to get the most bang for our buck in that case. So like the materials and resources piece does go through that process where we look at what research shows works and what other districts are using. I know Chrissy brings information from the LUDA districts. We get information from different listservs as well.
Carrie, an article that you were interested in, when they were looking at the intervention part, there was like a responsive classroom and second step. I know most of the kind of second step. So they were looking at some of those evidence-based programs in particular. Actually, a lot of research links back to Castle too, that looks at that academic increase, the pro-social. So that luckily has been done for us in terms of what are the effective programs and then what are the pieces of the program that have to be implemented with fidelity to get the outcome. So that stuff, that is out there.
But the structure itself, this is the MTSS structure that we have been using successfully on the academic side. It's the same structure that we're proposing, the tiered structure that is
Then,
nationwide.
forgive me, I'm a little thick today. How do we come up with the numbers? That is to say, you made requests for people, for FTEs. How do you come up with numbers? Theoretically, twice what you asked for would be better than what you asked for, in theory. I mean, given the discussion we've had tonight. So how do you then back into it and say, what is a reasonable figure to get a reasonable return on our investment? How did we come up with that? That's my question. That has a question mark in that.
Okay, so getting back to the castle data and so on, study, whatever it is. Jeff, I think that's a great question, but I think an even bigger question is, and this is why I mentioned castle again, and the 11-to-1 return in a societal sense, right? You paint this picture of Jane, a student, all through our classes, our grades, and so on. What's left out is the other half of the picture, and that's the parents. When you get to the 11-to-1 and the castle stuff, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm betting that I'll start to see something about what's there or not there. And what I want to know as a board member is, we have limited dollars to spend. Where can we best spend them? Which comes back to your question, Jeff. And how much responsibility does public education bear versus parents or other societal structures and supports? So we don't have that side of the portrait yet. We've got part of it, but not all of it.
So that's a really good question. So if you look at our data and national data, so right now, nationally, we have kids 18 and younger, about 41% are considered low. Illinois is about 43%. Dekalb here is about 53%, or a little above. What research finds is there's really two pieces to the puzzle in terms of why we find that kids who are low income have higher mental health needs. One is what's called the stress diathesis model. What that means in general is that we all have a certain amount of ability to cope, but when we constantly have different stressors, beyond what a middle-class person like myself might have in terms of putting food on the table, meeting certain shifts, being able to wrangle for daycare, having one parent, having my own chronic illness, that lowers my ability to that when little stressors show up to be able to handle them appropriately. Then model to my child how to handle that appropriately. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is cognitive load. And so what they find is parents that live in poverty or low income, generally speaking, have a higher cognitive load on them. And so while they love their kids just as much as I love my kids, because so much of their cognitive abilities are spent being able to fulfill basic needs, shelter, food, things like that. They don't have the same then capacity to do all the things that I might do in terms of positive parenting, using timeout systems instead of spankings, things like that. And so it's not the love that's not there, it's not the desire that's not there, but it's really a function of their poverty. So it's not surprising to me that as we see our numbers increase, that we're seeing kids that don't have these skills the same way that we would see in maybe a lower, or district that had lower.
Well, what I've heard about poor Jane throughout this whole thing started out as a child who didn't get enough attention. And this child who didn't get enough attention got to school and craved attention. When she got attention delivered to her, what does a good behaviorist say she's likely to do again? She's going to repeat exactly the same thing because we rewarded what it was that she wanted. How do we get past, if we keep on doing the same thing all the way through her high school career, I get to the point where in middle school, and now the solution is we need to get her into a team where there's 7 people there instead of only 2. And now what the heck do we do? Are we going the wrong way?
So
maybe she doesn't need attention.
Yeah, so what what we're looking at is when you have those teams, and you have the social workers and the psychologists that are pretty well versed in behavioral psychology, is they find that the function of behavior is I run out of the classroom, that means the teacher chases me, and even though it's negative attention, it's what I need. And so if we keep chasing her out of the classroom, right, we're going to increase that behavior. So when we talk about getting together with those teams, part of it is identifying what is the maintaining consequence of that behavior and starting to shift the paradigm of how are we going to provide positive, non-contingent support to the student so that that positive or that attention isn't contingent on her running out, but is contingent on her doing the pro-social behavior that we're teaching her through the social skills. So that's part of that team.
I'd like to make a comment. So I want to play the devil's advocate here, so to speak. If you go back to that slide, please, to the outplacements therapeutic day. I want to point that out. Can you go back? Sorry about that. Put you on the spot. Okay. So I'm drawn to the average per student cost for outplacement at $32,932.
Yes, sir.
And I'm not going to pretend I have good eyes, but if I blow this up, even though the number is fairly faint, the number of students on the left, it appears that we're close right now. As of January, it's at 90.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So that number, if you run 90 kids times 32.9 is going to be, let's just do my farmer math again and say 100, that's $3.2 million. If we have 6,500 kids in the district, and according to your chart, if there's your top tier of the students who are, I'll say, in the most trouble, for lack of better term, 1 to 5% of those students. Does that, okay, so the way I read it is 1 to 5% of those students at the very top of that matrix would require the most help. Is that right?
That is kind of when your system is fully working, that you would have about 1 to 5% with the most intensive.
All right. So
what we're seeing is that's bleeding because.
All right. So let's just stick with that number. Let's just call it 5%, just to make sure I'm thinking on the right way.
Yeah, sure.
So let's just say 5% of the 6,500 that we have going here in the district is 325, right? So if you said, hey, just from a cost perspective, and this is much more than just cost, right? But let's just say you looked at it just from this cost perspective. 325 kids having to be outplaced at $32,932 pushes you well over $10 million. Right? So I think we could also look at it that way, to say there's a cost of doing nothing. Right? And to me, that if I understand, if I'm following this right, to me, the cost is having a greater number, whether it's 5%, you use 5% as an example. But the fact of the matter is, for every 30 kids that has to be outplaced, it ticks off about $1 million, just roughly. Right? So, using, 30 times this 32 million, just roughly, about $1 million. So that's something to really be cognizant of if we do nothing.
Yes.
I just want to make that point.
And that presumes that the district is responsible for those 30 kids,
That's
and that
correct.
no other societal entity is going to be involved.
That's presuming that we are already paying $32,932 for nearly 90.
Yeah.
That's a fact. That's a fact. So I can't sit here and say I can reasonably expect that number to remain flat or decrease. Especially if I do nothing, that number really, I would expect it to grow. So when I look at all this, I'm deciding here that, we have to weigh, obviously we have a limited amount of dollars. We all know that, and we all know what the dollars are. But I'm suggesting that there's a cost of doing nothing. And that cost is $32,932 in this year's cost. for every kid that we can't affect here. And then we have to outsource.
But Carrie, but Rick, your presumption is that that is going to go down by the number of people that we throw at the.
No, my presumption is that if we do nothing, it's gonna increase.
Yeah.
It's increasing already. We are doing something.
But if we don't try and gather, and you won't see maybe an immediate impact, you might. But if we don't try and reach out to those kids and prevent them from having to go to the therapeutic day program, to me, that's not an end goal, but just from a cost perspective, if we don't prevent that, then it really costs the district much more than if we spend $1 million on the staff that's required now. So for me, I look at it as though some expenditure, whether $1 million is right or not, some expenditure in additional resources may be a good idea as a cost preventative measure when you look at, again, this number is a real number per kid.
It's not attached to anything. It's not attached to, we don't have anything attached to it. In other words, how much we're doing and by how much it's rising. It has risen significantly. We have stayed the same for the number of people or added people. I think we've added staff during that period of time. No, we've had none? Okay, so this is dealing with a period of time where it's rising for other issues. We don't know whether what we can do is throw some assistance at it and see a reasonable amount of change. My suggestion would be, if that were the case, is to say, okay, let's take a look and see if by throwing more assistance at it, you do affect that trajectory, this trajectory, which is incredibly troubling. That's 3 people, that's 3 children at a normal rate for every one of these kids that we send off someplace else. So the point being, we haven't really attached solution, the remedy to the problem, or the remedy to the what is shown here, kids being sent away. We haven't attached a remedy to it. We've seen it grow by not doing so. Apparently you guys say we haven't done anything. We have added no extra staff during this period of time. By numbers of people. So we could then, theoretically, then we might be able to attribute some of that to.
I just wanted us to think about this a different way, because I appreciate, I understand, look, I want to save the buck as much as we all do. But I think there's a genuine need for some of this. I don't want to get too fuzzy. I don't understand. I'm a little more old-fashioned when it comes to discipline, so don't ask me about that. But I think there's a need to do something, right? There's a need to do something. And for the people like me that tend to look at the dollars and what does that mean, I think that we could propose to look at it the way I was just, suggesting, is that there's a real cost to doing nothing. And that's every $32,932 that the district is going to spend for a kid that we can't reach and we can't help, and we have to send out the therapeutic day program. That's all. That was the only point that I wanted to make.
Dr. Becker, could I ask you to maybe address them? We did all day kindergarten, right? So we've got that in place, which is great. But I know I've talked to kindergarten teachers. We've had a committee that's met a few times, talking about taking that first 6 to 8 weeks of school and really focusing 100% on social and emotional needs, getting out the kitchens again, play sets, more recess. Can you speak to some of that, how that might help if we were to make that change for kindergarten?
Yeah. Let me jump in. About 2 years ago, it could be 3, we backed up in the curriculum in kindergarten, especially last year. And in all of our classes in elementary, we don't start Common Core curriculum until about 3 weeks in. We spent time still doing standards, but building that sense of community, understanding school, what does it look like in all our grade levels. And then in kindergarten, especially in the last 2 years, we've backed up. We've given permission to teachers to say, if you need to spend more time developing those relationships, and like you just mentioned, the play model, and teach them how to interact, and that's what you need to do. Because they're not getting through learning their letters and numbers and sounds if they can't get through those pieces. So that's what we've been doing the last 2 years. We've also been purchasing other additional books, things like that, that help our kids, try to teach our kids to understand and get along with one another and understand how to work in a school. So we've been working hard on that.
Do we need to look at making that a period of time for certain levels? I mean, if we give it effective to a point with more time in order to that investment.
I think it depends on the classroom. It depends on the makeup of that classroom for that particular year. But we have, as a department, as a district, have given that teacher that permission to then stop and let's work on those pieces first. As they've been saying, it'd be nice to have someone help that teacher because none of us are trained in how to work with kids with those types of behaviors and social. So it'd be nice to have an adult in the building who could come and team with these kindergarten teachers, especially in those first few weeks. But we don't necessarily have that support.
The other thing that we didn't, or that when we were following our friend Jane, up, we didn't take into consideration, and I'd like to know, I've been looking for this throughout the time that I've been on the board, is people that join us at 6th grade, or people that we don't. I mean, you took Jane through an intervention when Jane was little. We can do some help. I mean, there's some things we can do. All of a sudden, we pick up someone at 5th grade, or we pick somebody up at 6th or 7th grade. I haven't seen what kind of intervention we would plan for that person that comes in that is totally changed, coming in from somewhere completely different. And obviously they're going to feel alienated. Obviously they're not going to feel like they're part of the system because they're coming in. So, I mean, I realize that we can't interpret every possibility, but I don't even know how many people are coming in at that 5th grade. How many people are coming in 4th grade? How many? I haven't seen any statistics on migration.
This doesn't show by grade level, but here's some of the demographic changes that we've seen across the past 10 years. If you scroll down, mobility is at the bottom. The darker orange line is our percent mobility as a district. The lighter orange line, it's hard to see because it tracks right with ours, is the state percent mobility. So we've been relatively constant. Again, that's across the whole district and doesn't break it down to specifically address the question.
I can't see very well. Which is us?
Yes, so we are the.
We have an 11.5% mobility rate.
Means that every 11.5% of every grade level is
Well,
moving
that's
in and out.
the in and out.
Yeah. So 11%, and then the state percentage.
You can see it now. I mean, over the 10-year period, our mobility rate has decreased, stabilized a little bit from 17 to 11, but students with high mobility, and Dr. Becker can speak to this better than I, they have unique challenges because of just being a more mobile student and going from one place to another.
Right.
Just to clarify, though, the state average is right about where we are as well. The yellow bars up there, that's a different indicator. That's percent low income. And so that the heavier line is our change from 34.5% in 2007 to 59.6% in 2017. The thin yellow line, I'm sorry if you can't see it, is the state. So I've started out below the state average, and now we are significantly above the state average across time. So that's the change in the last 10 years, and then that's total enrollment change, which is about 650 students.
Yeah, you can see the slope's different.
Yeah.
Quite a bit different.
Yeah. So, any other questions?
Yeah, I had one. Way back when you were talking about teachers in general, right at the start of the talk, you said that teachers felt efficacious in teaching the social emotional, but that they didn't have enough time. Before you said that, I was thinking right away, just based on what you'd already shown at that point, well, why aren't they teaching this over at NIU? Why aren't they teaching all teachers to be qualified to handle these kids? Because We now have, what, 16% or something of our kids, that have these serious issues. It's a lot of numbers out of 6,500. And so I thought, well, then, it seems obvious to me that you want to be teaching this to new teachers, right, as they're coming into the business, right? And then you said, well, it's not so much that the teachers today don't feel they can do it, they don't have enough time to do it. So then why, one more thing, Jamie, so then why are we asking for social workers and psychologists and specialists, right? Rather than just more classroom teachers, so we get the ratio down, so that those efficacious teachers can handle this issue.
I would imagine, not being a budget-minded person, that in order to get those ratios down to, let's say, 1 to 20, that my assumption is it's way more FTEs than what we're proposing here. I probably think that's correct. In terms of space and building space and things like that.
But to answer that, our teachers do work on the social emotional piece with the tier 1 group. It's the outliers, the kids that are tier 2 kids, or kids that are tier 3 kids, that when you have 27 children in a classroom and you have the outlier students that we've described here tonight, those are students that when they're lashing out verbally, when they're fleeing, when they are being physically aggressive with teacher peers, those are students who need the more intense services that a classroom teacher can't provide.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, or what that means then, is that the added dollars or FTE, if you want to talk about FTE, are going to be spent or need to be spent on those few that are at the top of the pyramid of 1 to 5%, rather than tier 1. So that goes against the notion, that classroom teachers as a group and at large, not specialists, can't really solve the problem, even with extra time, because they do need specialized training and so on for that relatively small number. I mean, as compared to tier 1, tier 2 to tier 3 interventions, those are the people that need lots and lots and lots of time or money or specialization. So that's the opposite of what I was thinking that I was learning about. All classroom teachers apparently are able to handle the social emotional learning.
And I don't think it's either or. So I don't think if you have a full-time social worker at Lincoln, I don't think it's either you spend your time on with crisis or you're only doing work. Having a full-time social worker in each elementary school plus a half-time site allows for that more holistic. So that we're building the systems and that they're supporting those systems on a tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 level. No one, when I'm hired as a school site, my job description isn't to only respond to crisis. It is to respond to crisis, but also to support these kids. So they would be expected to support others.
I guess, Sarah, I hear the needs are there, but really, I think we kind of need a plan on where are we going to put these people when they come? What are they going to be doing? What are we going to do to, have consistency in each building on what we do? So it's not like you mentioned earlier, it's this here, it's not there. Those kind of things. I think, can we see that so we can see kind of what we see what we what we need now, but what's the plan with those needs?
Yeah, we do have we'll talk about what that looks like, but that is the next charge of our committee that kind of ad hoc got together, and we're looking at, okay, we have the student resources, but then what are the systems? Very much modeled like how we do our academic. We're not going to reinvent the wheel. Ensuring that we have like interventions across them, like interventions across or tier 1 interventions. It would go through the same screening process to each of them.
But here you have it broken down.
Yeah.
From a personnel perspective, I believe is the question.
I'm sorry.
From a personnel perspective, if we had these FTE,
yes,
what's their job assignment and what location? And ultimately, what we were looking for is a social worker in every building. There is an exception between two buildings.
Yes, possible exception between two buildings
That
that do
would-
not have the programs or the enrollment. We looked at enrollment, we looked at programs, and mobility and so forth to come up with how we would then, where we would put these additional supports.
I mean, it's just, we need to know what that plan is.
Which we have that plan, and we can send that out to you via email. And it is encompassed in this, we just didn't go into depth with it because of the time this evening.
Are we good with that?
I'm good, yeah.
Is this gonna come back in 2 weeks for action?
And that's decide on. I think we need to do both pieces together. I mean, does everybody agree on
Let's look
that?
at the plan and then make sure we're, okay with that. If we have questions about that, we can ask. But, I think that's the general idea is to look at the plan and evaluate it and go from there.
So enough updated information on the plan.
Let's see what we're talking about. I mean, they put all this information here. The fact of the matter is we have these talks now. Let's at least see what we're talking about.
I don't know about the plan itself, but as far as the action on FTE, I can't imagine getting ready in 2 weeks to vote on something like that. I mean, there's still too much missing. This has been a very extensive presentation, but there's still a great deal of picture missing for me.
Well, put your questions down together and get them in. And
Well, the first thing I have to do is go to the links and read
do
some.
all that stuff.
So who should we address questions to?
Yeah, good question.
Okay.
Okay, and one other thing, the material we have on backup online here does not agree. I mean, for instance, the teachers' names aren't included in this, and some of the slides again are not in the package here. So is there something that we can get?
Oh, share this one with you?
Yeah, thank you.
So questions, please address those to Jamie.
Thank you, ladies.
Next, we have the 2018-2019 position FTE increase request. And this is an information item.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This directly ties to what we were just talking about tonight, but Selective Leadership has been working together to identify FTE needs, operational needs, so we provided those requests to you, several of which tie directly to the presentation that you just heard. One clarifying point, under the non-certified positions, administrative assistant that is listed here would be better classified as an increase from 220 day to a 260 day increase rather than 11 to 12 months to account for break period that we currently are not receiving. So we have leadership here from respective areas. If there are specific questions, I know that there are probably a lot from the presentation that we just heard from student services perspective, and that we're going to review that presentation and develop those. Are there any others that we can address, or some included within?
I think for me, you can piggyback on what we just saw.
Yeah, correct.
I'm sure we just heard it for that presentation.
We'll bring this back to that.
Yep, I guess, but I think what we need also to see here is a priority list of what is priority 1, 2, 3, so that we can look at this and make some decisions.
Should we structure that in terms of dollars or FTE? So do we have a FTE number that we'd be projected to hit?
No, I think it'd be best for you guys to come back with the priorities and then we can take a look at it. Is that fair or?
That's a good question. Victoria, I have an issue with a couple of things, and then with respect to voting on any of this, right? I mean, that's a good presentation. I think there's a lot more that needs to be understood. But just generally, a couple of things. Discipline works into this, as far as I'm concerned. A kid throws a chair across the room or something in class, so get out of there, or she, as far as I'm concerned. Okay, I don't know that that's happened. That's why I'm very interested in this discipline committee and so on, whatever we've got. But, so there's two things. There's the aspect of discipline. When do you cease to, and Howard, you spoke to this a little bit, I think, with your be a Skinner kind of notion, that it's going to be positively reinforced if you keep.
We don't want to make mistakes with it, do the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's.
So the discipline fact of life is there, and I think needs to be, in my mind at least, understood, so that I know then, when do we simply eject the person back to the parents or wherever, and let some other entity besides B428 deal with whatever problems there are. And I don't know if that's just for a day. Sorry?
That's the outplacement.
That's the outplacement?
I mean, eventually.
Well,
That's where we feel like we're wasting $32,000 on.
I think those are maybe some questions for 2 weeks from now when we come back with the plan. And then we can.
Yeah, but I hope that within 2 weeks, I can personally learn something about the discipline committee, get a better handle on what we're doing or not doing with respect to that. And then also the residency check. No one wants to talk about it, but if our numbers change, then our FTE will change. Maybe not just with respect to social emotional learning either. So, I mean, there's a couple of factors there. And that's why I say, I think it's all very interesting and bears a lot of looking at, but I'm not at all clear on what we really ought to be doing. So Sarah's given us a real nice table here of these requests.
History, I was saying that I'm asking them to prioritize.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And come back with information on it.
Yeah, just as long as we don't get too down the road, but understanding some of the basis of everything, that's how I see it. So, okay.
I would say too, that, I mean,
I think
I would suggest, if you have your specific question, ask Jake. And his staff will chase those down for you, but so that in 2 weeks from now, when we come back and we're looking at everything, then you'll have the better sense of what's going on. You'll have more background, and you'll be able to make a better decision. So that's what I would suggest.
Looking at board policy, and this is, I'm glad we can talk about this a little bit right here, because, looking at board policy, I went over the whole thing a couple times. Maybe I missed something. I hope not, but maybe I did. But I could only find one specific listing of a standing discipline committee.
I don't know anything.
Now, I can ask questions of Jamie, but you know what? It takes time. At least for me, it will take time to develop a sense of where the district is with respect to discipline in the classroom.
And can you make an appointment with me, and I can talk to you what the discipline committee is and what it's for?
Well, sure, I'll be glad to. And I'm only looking at this, I'm looking at it as an interested citizen, but also, as the appointed board member for the standing discipline committee and whatever other discipline committee there might be or should be. And I think the board ought to look at policy, and I would ask, for instance, why do they have a very specific reference to a standing discipline committee for students with special needs? And yet I could find no reference in policy for a discipline committee and a board member representation on the committee for all of the students. To me, that makes no sense, especially based on the ratio.
The board develops policy, and the administrative staff follows policy.
Yeah.
The board doesn't get into the weeds with individual discipline situations.
Yeah, I agree. And most of that should be handled at the building level.
Yes.
But what I am saying is that I think our policy might be without, a particular policy that speaks to all students. It clearly has something, I don't know what it is exactly, that speaks to students with special needs. Why isn't there something? Why couldn't I find something? And again, if I missed it, I'm sorry, but I haven't found it yet. Why isn't there something that speaks to discipline with respect to all students, not just special needs students? With respect to board representation on.
Let's meet to discuss.
Okay.
I'm on the non-business consent agenda. Okay, now we have the non-business consent agenda. This is an action item that the Board of Education approve the non-business consent agenda items A through D.
Second.
Discussion?
No. Sorry, Val.
Okay, roll call, please.
Mayor Millette,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Dekalb.
Yes.
Next, we have business and finance. And this is an action item that the Board of Education approve the purchase order requisition list as attached. Do you have a motion?
So
Second.
Discussion? Roll call.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albert,
Yes.
Mary Malone,
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes. And next we have new business and administration. This is a discussion item. Chromebook non-rolling 2018. And this is Dr. Huber and
Yeah, so this is a plan for students in grades 5th through 11th to keep their devices over the summer. Obviously, seniors will be turning theirs in, and grades 3rd through 4th will be turning them in before they depart for summer. Students who know that they will be transitioning to a different state or a different district, they will also be asked to turn in their devices beforehand. There will be communication with the parents to have the student turn in the devices to the main office. And the parent will receive a receipt for the device when it is turned in, so they have a record as well as us. The curriculum and instruction and technology departments will begin communicating this roll in to parents and students after spring break as an opt-in option. Broken devices will still need to be turned in for repair prior to summer, so we have enough leeway time in order to get repairs done. We'll have contact before the start of the 18-19 school year with the families to demand, to remind them to turn in any damaged devices ahead of the school year, so we can resolve those damages before the school year starts. And some of the advantages of doing this, the students are able to continue using the devices for the educational pursuits, including the licensing of our curriculum software, which goes all year long. Allows the students to fill out applications for college and career opportunities. And it also reduces the FTE hours from the curriculum and instruction team, the technology team, building admin, and basically the entire assistance union, which was utilized for rollout and roll-in. And if you ask some of our middle school and high school, our secondary building leadership, I assure you that it would be a great help if the students were able to hang on to their devices. Questions? Yes.
Do we do much in the way of maintenance? Like, in other words, during the school year, do kids come to you on a regular basis seeking some sort of assistance on making things work, or that kind of technology type stuff interplay? And how would that happen if it's necessary during that summer?
Yeah, usually only if the device is damaged, and then the student goes to the media center, they check it in, get a loaner, we take a look at what's going on with the device. Not all the time is it damaged, sometimes the student just didn't charge it. We run across some of those basic issues sometimes, especially at the elementary level. But in terms of over the summer, if the device breaks, the student cracks the screen or something like that, that's when we're reminding parents. We'll do it through Sky Alerts and things like that, constant contact with the parents to basically state that the device needs to be turned in. We'll give some easy options, like we'll have some staff maybe at the library or something like that on a couple designated days and times, so that we have some flexibility to get those devices in so we can get them out for repair.
Great. Thanks.
I don't like it. I guess that's in 3 words. Sorry, Ben. I understand the efficiency, and I can see where it'd be less costly and so on, and would free up some time for our staff. But what I worry about is screen time. Jamie, you sent out an email this afternoon with a very good article. I hope you all read it if you haven't already. And it discusses this very thing about technology and screen time and kids today who don't develop relationships with their friends, with their parents, and so on, with society in general, in fact, because they've always got their face on their phone or their iPad or their Chromebook or whatever. Right? I'm very, very reluctant, even though I'd be a big fan, for those few that would be learning, and I know retaining over the summer. I understand all that, but I don't see it as a good thing necessarily. I'm very, very concerned about it. And if you guys can tell me something that will, turn my thought the other direction, that I'm all ears. But in general, society right now is in a really bad place because, and this article is very good at saying not just the kids, the parents are glued to their phones. It's crazy. So anyway, I won't speak on it further. I'm sorry,
Well, I mean, there's lots of interpretations in terms of screen time. I mean, I guess I can say I'm a prodigy of screen time. I stare in front of the screen all day long. I don't have issues communicating with people either. So, but on the flip of it is, yeah, I mean, obviously, if the parents aren't involved with their student and making sure that the student isn't processing as a normal kid growing up, then you're going to run across those issues. And if it's not the device, then what is it? The Nintendo, it's the TV. We used to be complaints about the TV being babysitter.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. I mean, the TV was the babysitter for many, many years. And now it's been not replaced, but, you know, supplemented by various forms of mobile entertainment.
I think we're giving them an opportunity to use the device in a positive fashion, and maybe they get more out of it than sitting in front of the TV and watching boring.
I just read an interesting article talking about screen time and parents and responsibility that we all have to be safe in the world, about a major automotive manufacturer and how their heads-up displays are good or bad, you know, depending on how they're laid out and so on and so forth. It's quite an interesting study, actually. I haven't finished looking at it.
Okay. Is the students in 2 through 11 keeping their Chromebooks, is that going to be optional, or is that going to be
5 through 11, it's optional. Parents can opt out of their student keeping the device, in which case we're asking them to make sure that their student turns it in at the end of the school year.
So yes, they can choose to turn it in.
So one other aspect of this is that, you know, I've been thinking about this since I saw the backup on this, and I thought, well, what about kids that are in 10th, 11th grade? You know, that one of the ideas was, I guess, that they could apply, you know, for scholarships or to college or so on. Right? My view on that is let them get out of the house. Let them go down to Kish, let them go down to the library, you know, let them talk to other people, you know, let them apply and get into the world because they're of that age at that point where they need to do that. You know, so sometimes, you know, having too much resource is maybe not a good thing if it's too close to you. Sometimes it's better to go out and get resource elsewhere. You know, back to the thing about screen time. You know, there's a lot of ways to build relationships, and looking into a screen on a cell phone, in my view, is not one of them.
And I would argue that I don't know what percent, but a large percent of our high school kids, probably a large percent of our middle school kids have cell phones, have a device other than if they were taking this home.
Right.
And I'm not arguing about the screen time. I liked the article too. However, they have other devices at their disposal.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, the little cell phone that fits in my pocket, almost, my old one fits in my pocket, but anyway, you know, that's a lot different and a lot more convenient than a television or even a Chromebook. You know, so I think as we get further along, someday there'll be a hologram, you know, that's popping in front of you. You know, the technology will just be crazy.
We'll decide whether they get to go home.
Okay, guys.
Yes.
TikTok.
Anyway, sorry, Mike.
I'm sorry.
Just leave it here, I'm gonna go to work.
Yeah.
That's just it's an information.
This information, thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yep, thanks.
Next, we have the DHS marching bars uniform bid, and this is an informational item.
Good evening. Before I get started, I want to quickly draw everybody's attention to the back. This is Alex Pasego and Lucia Verona. We have samples for the uniforms. Part of the display tonight is going to be them changing into said sample. So you have a couple of minutes to go get changed. And the reason I want to start with that is because one of the reasons why we're here tonight, the current uniform that's worn by the marching bars is something that generally requires us to show up about 45 minutes to an hour before we go on any public display. And I'm pretty confident they can pull this off in about 5 minutes. And that's something that's really exciting for our program, obviously for a variety of reasons. But that's just kind of one of many reasons why we came here. The process actually probably began about 2 years ago. It was either 2 or 3 years ago. We actually put every single jacket that we own on a band member, and there was not a single extra one in the closet. And the band director had a small little freak out moment, like, oh my goodness, if we get one more kid, we're gonna have to like pretend to put them in a uniform or something like that. We kind of got the wheels moving a little bit on the future, and we kind of looked at the age of the uniforms. We considered a number of options. And given the changes in technology in the last 14 years, the overwhelming choice is going to be significantly wiser to go in the direction of a newly built uniform that would be machine washable, saving the school thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in dry cleaning costs every year. And, you know, also there's a certain amount of school spirit that the technology has changed so much in the way that products are produced in you know, the time that we're talking about, that we can put something on kids now that looks like Dekalb. You know, what we're wearing right now is essentially white, black, and orange with, there's one spot on the uniform that says Dekalb. And, you know, we ask people, can we make this look like when you come to a Dekalb football game, the band comes out and you know it's Dekalb. And that was kind of something that we had tasked people to do. And I think you'll see when kids come back, you know, one of my favorite comments, one of the seniors who's, you know, sad not ever getting to wear a uniform, said, I didn't think I could ever love something that screams Dekalb quite this much as playing. So that's kind of, you know, part of the process. And to be very, very honest with all of you, I could probably talk about any part of this process for a really long time. And I don't necessarily want to get into all of the details unless you all really want to. So the baseline stuff is the things that we're wearing now are quite old. They have treated us very well, but we are talking a 14-year-old uniform that next fall would be older than some of the people wearing them. We're in a situation where we've been bringing 1 to 3 adults with us every time we go anywhere, just to pick up the fallen pieces that are falling off and try to sew them back on before we do it again the next time. You know, so the need has become very real. We would, you know, we would very much like to try and do it by next fall so that we don't have to go through another year of picking up the pieces and throwing them back on. That all said, the process of building new ones does take some time. When we came with the request to bid back in December, it put us on a timeline where we would have to, if we were going to go ahead and do it for the fall of 2018, that decision would have to happen here, you know, this month. We would need some kind of go ahead and do that if we were going to do that. And we're talking, so the bids call for an August 1st delivery. I know you guys have the bid data in front of you. We sampled out 2 separate designs. I wanted to have the bidding process be truly competitive. What a lot of high school bands will do, the process to design a uniform is actually a months-long process where you work with a representative from a company and an artist on creating a design that fits what you want. And typically what happens is the school will come up with one design, then try to solicit multiple vendors to bid on said design. But then in a lot of cases, we'll get essentially, you know, a fake bidding process, and that people won't want to bid on somebody else's design. So in order to ensure that wouldn't happen, we separately solicited 2 separate designs that we thought would be very comparable in terms of quality and price. We have samples of both of those uniforms that'll be out here in just a little bit. The prices did come back in a very, very similar ballpark to one another. My hope is that, in my mind, the smartest thing to do is to take the time, to study the difference between the 2 of them. Ideally, a marching band purchase is something that, you know, buy a high quality uniform, it should last for 10 years. If you get really lucky, they say you make it 15. So what we wanted to do was take the time to actually run them through the washing machine, maybe 30 times. Maybe take them out in the field, you know, put drums on them, do all the kind of things that we know they're going to have to endure, and see which one is, you know, more durable, so to speak, and a better investment of our dollars. In terms of funding, I did quite a bit of research in regards to how this type of purchase is typically made in school districts. We've seen everything for the just so that you're all aware, in our local school district area, many of our neighbors have purchased recently within the last 5 years. Sycamore, Kingland, and Rochelle have all bought new. And we've seen everything from, price sharing to full coverage by the school district. We have raised not quite half of the money for this, but we had another fundraiser on the agenda earlier tonight. We have a fundraiser that our parent group is running next weekend, and we're confident that we will be at 50% raised before the end of this school year. And we were asking the school board to consider putting the other 50% in the district music budget as a one-time addition to the music budget for the purposes of making a uniform purchase.
I mean, so I don't know which one we're picking. That one. Yes. They don't look near hot enough during the summer months.
No, honestly, part of what we designed is this would be lighter, so that the kids, when it's cold, it would be, hey, you need to layer up.
Yeah.
The number of times that I've had kids pass out is more than I care to share with all of you. But when it's 85 and we're in full wool, the current uniform has 2 layers of wool. It's not a good choice. And as you're all aware, because of you've been shopping, fabric has changed quite a bit in the last decade.
Yeah.
And then these are all synthetic fibers, significantly lighter on the kids. Like I said, it's more durable, it's washable. It's
More comfortable, guys.
Yeah, very comfortable. Very feels like it. Really great. Yeah.
Has this been chosen by band members?
Okay, so now that's the design process. We actually have looked through, I haven't shared all of them with the kids, but I probably have a folder of about 35 designs. And starting in the fall, I ran different sketches past the kids and we had them kind of make comments and, I liked this, I didn't like that. And then we sent that off to the designer, say the kid said this, the kid said that. And kind of tried to narrow all of the commentary into, what you guys ultimately see before you today.
And you can layer up for cold weather.
Correct. That was a conscious choice because you can't unlayer,
right?
But you can add layers. So because we will perform in hot and cold. As an Illinois band that runs from August to some years January, you have to be able to be prepared for the weather, and we were really only fit to be 60 and colder in what we've been wearing. So they're still going to be warm when it's 80, but I'd like to think that it's a heck of a lot safer than wearing a wool coat with a wool overlay.
Right.
I guess I asked the board, what do you think our contribution should be as a district to the uniforms? What's fair?
First thing that comes to mind, Victoria, is if we offer the band, you've asked for 50%, right?
Correct.
Total cost. If we do that amount, what other organizations in 428 would perhaps come to us and ask for a similar amount for their purposes? So do we have a handle on that? I know that's not your responsibility, but our responsibility to find out, where else might we need to invest money if we were to do this?
And I think that's a concern
Yeah,
that I have.
Good question.
Is what other requests are going to receive?
Do you guys get any money from the Booster Club? The Power Booster?
Mm-hmm. They gave us $7,746.
That the sports booster?
Yes, that's the sports boosters. The rest of the money we currently have in hand has been raised either by the band program itself or through music.
Okay, No, you made that sound like that's two different groups.
It is different, because the bar boosters, the athletic boosters.
No,
and
I
the
mean,
music
the one you just said through the band or the music booster.
Oh, yeah, well, sometimes, for example, that's pretty easy to explain. The fundraiser that you guys approved tonight is technically a band fundraiser because it was approved by the school to be run by the band program, whereas our boosters run their fundraisers on their own. So, for example, next weekend, they're having a drawdown raffle.
Yeah.
That's money that they'll raise privately and for the purposes of donating to us.
So there's two sets of boosters in the music program?
No, it's no, it's like the band, like the same way that like when the football players come to your house and try to sell you the cards, that's like we're gonna band fundraiser. Like we're gonna the plant fundraiser, that's our kids going out and trying to solicit as compared to the adult organization work.
I have a question in regard to, you were saying that the current uniforms have lasted 10 years.
Well, no, they're 14 years old.
14 years.
Yes.
Sorry. So the money that you acquire to pay for uniforms, you probably do that on a yearly basis. Is that for replacement of uniforms or to pay back on, to pay ahead? What, I assume you try to do some fundraising every year. Is some of that for uniforms or is that all
No,
done?
honestly, we barely stay afloat if we're being really honest.
Say again?
We barely stay afloat with the fundraising that we do. You know, for example, like when we travel, the Ireland thing, that was $250,000 that we footed, through the backs of our families. And we have great families, and they're amazing people. I have nothing but good things to say, and I feel really honored to work for them. But on a certain level, there are limits to what we can do. And at this point, the difference between purchasing a trip for your child and purchasing a uniform that your kid's going to wear once or twice, that's going to become school district property that other kids are going to wear for the next decade.
Right.
And I think that's part of why I feel like the half and half is we are talking about district property here, and we are talking about something that's going to,
it was a
hopefully last three generations of students.
It was just a point of
clarification. Sure.
Thank you very much.
All right, would you be, because the question that Kara brought up is a very good question.
Oh, sure.
Because you're gonna have everybody beating the door down for money. How would you feel if the district give you X amount of dollars? The rest of the money would be given to you as a loan that the band will pay back to the district over, obviously, some years spread out there.
I think the band would be, whatever put them in, like if you talk to kids, whatever put them in new uniforms next year, they would say, Mr. Lundy, you should sign up for that today. The hard part about answering the loan question is just in terms of like how we would pay it. I think I would, as a general idea, I would support that. There are various different budgets. For what it's worth, the district music budget, the last time the current uniforms were actually purchased in 2 phases. We ran out of them 3 years after we bought them. And the original uniforms were bought through a split between district and fundraised dollars. That second run was purchased entirely through the District 428 music budget. But at that time, that budget was over $80,000 a year. That is now less than half of that. Sure. So when I went, that was actually the first place I started. Like, hey, is there money there for uniforms? Like, well, no, we haven't had money like that since before, the downturn. So like, I'm not the person that controls that budget. So just to say money's coming from there, I can't do. We do fundraise, and I can certainly say that the fundraising that we do could continue to pay back.
Yeah, and that's what I was.
That's what you
thinking.
okay. Okay.
I'm just thinking, if I said the district agreed to give you, say, $10,000, that's we're gonna give that to you.
Okay.
And $28,000 will be paid back as a loan, so to speak.
Okay.
You're gonna get a really good interest rate, I guarantee that.
You're sort of making a lease out of it.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. So we're not gonna want it back in 2 or 3 years, obviously.
Sure.
We want to make sure you got.
Yeah. Well, I would just want to be very realistic about what we raise in a year, so that.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Right. I would hate to promise something that we couldn't deliver.
Yep.
I would suggest 14 and 14, if that, I mean, that'd be my suggestion. Is 14 from us and 14 pay back.
Well, wait a minute, for higher
It's
than that, right?
38,000.
Bids are 70.
14
3
is
or
what, I'm sorry,
74.
44.
What about grants? Have you tried or?
We have
thought about-
I'm sorry, I should have, there is at least one grant that's in the pool of money that I'm discussing.
I mean, when you talked about the wall and the aspect of how many kids have fainted over the years, I mean, right away I think about, for instance, the Dekalb County Community Foundation, how they've come to various entities in the county with respect to
And they've been-
safety, health, and
Sure.
so on.
And they've been very kind to us. They have given us money. Not for this project. I wasn't up to apply because they had funded something shortly beforehand. They gave us $5,000 for the drums that the kids got 2 years ago. So I can apply again this spring. And certainly if we're talking about a loan situation, I would absolutely be applying for grants to try to pay that off sooner rather than later.
Okay, well, I guess can we come up with a number that we're willing to pay out of the district funds, or this year, and then what our.
Well, it would be next fiscal year because the bill would actually come due in September.
Okay.
For what it's worth. I don't know if that changes the way anyone is feeling about this.
Yeah, we know less and less as we go forward in time, right? I mean, what the state's gonna do and so on.
I'd be good with it.
But
We come back with a recommendation.
Yeah, I think we need to huddle a little bit.
Yeah.
Frankly, it seems like we don't know, honestly.
Am I I don't know if I've ever done this before me. Am I allowed to ask the board questions?
Not really.
I've definitely never done it. And the only reason I say that.
This is like Shark Tank.
Yeah, I'm into new territory, I'm sorry.
You're dead to me.
The only reason that I would want to do that, in order, both vendors have made it really clear that in order to stay for a guaranteed August 1st delivery, which is what was in the specs, that, they said, hey, when are the board meetings? And I said, the soonest to be approved would be the 20th. And they were both very clear that that would be cutting it really, really tight. So that we would have to have a decision by then. And I don't say that to pressure anybody, but like, if we're gonna discuss that loan thing, we would have to have a consensus on it by 2 weeks for us to still be able to meet the guarantee.
Well, let me ask the board
I'll be
this.
in touch with you
Do
before.
we get a consensus that we can't pay for the full 38,000 out of district funds?
Yeah, I can't say one way or the other before we get, I need some more, I need to understand what's going on, frankly. I mean, offhand, I get it, I want them to have the uniforms, I think.
Yeah,
we all do.
absolutely.
I think it's just about how much that we gotta, because like, obviously it's on the, band tonight and, then later we would be silly to not expect there to be others. So that's all, I mean, I think it's gonna be something, I just gotta say how much. But for me, I can't answer that, so.
Well, I don't
You
think
guys.
Tori and I made phone calls. How about you, Howard?
I'd like
You
to
guys?
also find out, before we come up with a number, where they will stand with fundraising after the next fundraiser that you're having, as you say, which is within this week.
Next 17th.
Yeah, so-
So let's get that down and then we'll figure out at least some significant portion of.
So you're looking for action by on the 20th?
Yeah, I mean,
We'll have it,
We can.
communicate.
Yep,
We'll communicate by then, with each other. We'll get some sort of.
yep.
You'll have everything counted up by the 17th as far as what your fundraising. total
that
is.
honestly, I probably won't have that on the 20th.
I don't think that's gonna figure into this. The board's gonna say, this is what we can put forward, and then we'll come back with the 20.
Yeah, because you know what, though, nobody's been scrappy to nothing with a paint, you know what I mean?
Well, and if we're talking about some kind of repayment scenario, like I think we can easily pursue that. If we're gonna say that on some level, even if it was like, hey, we'll loan you 38,000, I think we would still do that. Obviously, I think our families would love to hear that, we've seen some support, obviously, but.
I think we pretty much have got it that that's not what you're gonna get.
Okay.
You're not gonna get a loan of 30. I think we're gonna figure out something.
Yeah, we'll work something out.
Okay.
Yeah, let's talk, okay.
Yeah, because we want to move forward with
Do
it.
we have a consensus then to bring this back as an action item on the 20th?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Guys, you look wonderful.
Yep, I like those. Very nice.
Do you guys have a preference of one of the other?
Yeah.
I like you.
I like the one they like.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Good job, Lucia. Thank you.
Next, we have an Advanced College and Career Readiness Technology Program. This is an action item. Should the Board of Education approve the purchase of novices? Now, yes.
Yes, same thing.
We have a motion.
So moved.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albert,
Yes.
Karen Malak,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith.
Next, we have Employee Benefits Consultant Broker Services. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approve the request for proposal to allow for the bidding process to begin and secure an appropriate vendor.
So moved.
Okay. Roll call, please.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albert,
Yes.
Karen Malak,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Next, we have the extension of agreement with Community Therapy Services for SLP services. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approve extending the contract with Community Therapy Services for 1 day of service, 7.5 hours per day until the end of the year. We have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Jeff Albert,
Yes.
Karen Malak,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Next, we have the Dekalb Custodian School District 428 confidentiality agreement. This is an action item. That the Board of Education approve the Human Resource Department to include the revised confidentiality agreement for review and acknowledgement during the new hire process for all staff. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Discussion? Roll call, please.
Karen Malak,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Jeff Albert.
Yes.
Next, we have addition of 403B vendor. That the Board of Education approve the Horace Mann as 403B vendor for the DeKalb School District. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
Like you said, we have 15 other vendors in the same category or something like that.
What's our total, Sarah?
I have to double check, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. Recently, Ben met with Horace Mann, financial institution, that we think are reputable, and it's allowing our employees, another option for their, retirement planning for me.
So this is just one more
adding
additional
another
option
option.
in addition to all of those.
Yes.
We're not cutting anybody out of the list yet.
No.
Roll call?
Rick Smith,
Yes.
Howard Solomon.
Yes.
Fred Davis.
Yes.
Jeff Albert,
Yes.
Karen Malak,
Yes.
Victoria Newport.
Yes. Next, we have recommended revisions to Board of Education policies. This is a second reading. This is an action item that the Board of Education hold a second reading and approve recommended revisions from the Illinois Association of School Boards to Board of Education policies as attached. Do we have a motion?
Second.
Discussion? Okay, roll call.
Howard Solomon,
Yes.
Fred Davis,
Yes.
Jeff Albert,
Yes.
Karen Malak,
Yes.
Victoria Newport,
Yes.
Rick Smith.
Yes.
So with that, the meeting will be adjourned. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.